Alright, so we've got row 17 finished, and it's pretty small in there. I've stuffed him some more to make him nice and firm, and you can kind of see how that like bloats his neck out a little bit and kind of fills up his shape. So what we want to do now is we just want to do invisible decreases until we're done. There's no more room. So you can kind of shove the stuffing down, and you want to do these as tight as you possibly can so that your bottom really looks finished. So you do your invisible decreases just as you always do. However, you try to really tug on that piece of yarn to make sure that they're good and tight. And we're doing row 18, which is 6 invisible decreases. Sometimes depending on how tight or loose your work was, or depending on the yarn or the hook that you used, sometimes that might not be enough. You might have to add some at the end because it might seem like it's just not really finished off, or it might be too much. If ever you're working and it seems like the crochet, instead of wrapping around, what's left of your stuffing is sort of moving up, like kind of going up like that, then for whatever reason it may have just been too much and you worked really tight or whatever, and you want to just stop there and finish off. So this pattern is designed to have 6 invisible decreases at the end, but if you worked tight and you don't have room for 6, then just do whatever you have room for and finish off. So as you get closer to the end there, it gets harder and harder to work because everything's very tight and cramped. Now the way I judge to see if I have room to go is if my little flap that I'm working is going to pretty much cover that hole, that means I'm done. And I think maybe one more decrease, and then I'm going to finish off and weave in the end there because it looks pretty good. I think I made a mistake there, so we'll try that again. Alright. That's the good thing about crochet, is if you made a mistake, you can take it apart and start again. Alright, so now we're kind of, see how that piece is kind of coming up, even though this is about right. Okay? So what we do is just pull a good loop out like that to make sure that it doesn't unravel. You want to cut off, leave about 6 inches of the tail here, and take your yarn needle and thread that yarn through your needle. And you want to make sure that you go through that loop, because otherwise it's just going to unravel. So when you go through that loop, I'll show you, it just kind of ties itself. And then you've got that hideous little thing, but if you take your yarn needle and you just sort of weave into the stitches, and just connect everything so that all the edges are joined, all the stitches are and you can even kind of follow the pattern of the crochet so that it doesn't really show up too much, but for the most part the bottom of your piece will remain fairly invisible anyways. And this is also a good way if you had any decreases that left weird looking holes. This is a good way to kind of patch those up. You can go through and stitch through. You want to be careful not to do this so tightly that you warp your piece or make it take on a weird shape. So that's what the weaving in part is. Pulling the yarn through the loop was the finishing off. That was the weaving in. And then usually what you would do is just kind of weave your yarn around in a few random places just so, to make it a bit less likely to sort of unravel. And then usually what I do is I'll kind of push it out somewhere weird like that. And then not pull super taut, but just kind of pull it so that the yarn, and then I cut it really close. And then that piece of yarn gets sucked back in. So there's not like a piece of yarn sticking out looking weird. So that extra piece of yarn is somewhere in that peanut. So and there he is. And he's all done. All he needs now is ears.